Well, does Europe have a soul? Probably not. If we consider as our highest authority Jacques Delors, one of those who managed to propel integration to a new level of centralized bureaucracy. Toward the very end of his reign, Delors said that we need to give Europe a soul, donner une âme à l'Europe. Otherwise, as he put it, the game will be up. The presupposition was clear. If we need to give Europe a soul, it means it doesn't yet have one. When Jacques Delors spoke of Europe, he meant, of course, the European Union. Since he was supposedly Catholic, many assumed that he meant a Christian soul and that he could have been referring to the founding fathers, Schumann, de Gasperi, and others, who were devout Catholics and envisioned a future Europe, or so they said, as Christian as well as Romano-Greek. But the EU was different, and who else, if not Jacques Delors, should have known it? I therefore believe that his words meant something else, namely that the Union is a purely artificial construction and that until we endow it with a strong identity, so strong that we can metaphorically call it the European soul, it has little chance to survive. But has there ever been a chance for the emergence of a European soul in this sense? The question can be asked differently. Does the creation of the EU belong to a European tradition of responsible politics, or do its roots lie rather in a different tradition, one that generated innocuous political experiments, deprived people of freedom, and deceived them with harmful projects? In other words, does the European Union reflect wisdom and prudence, or recklessness and hubris? I tend to lean toward the latter. For one thing, I think that the Union was built on the lie, and that it's the same kind of lie that other designers of the future were using to cover up the ugly methods from which brave new worlds were supposed to be born. Let's take one of the key principles. Article 10.1 states, I quote, "The functioning of the European Union shall be founded on representative democracy," unquote. Is this really the case? The first thing that comes to mind that contradicts the quoted sentence is the distinction between democratic and populist parties, which determines European politics today. The concept of populism is not mentioned in the treaties, and given its vagueness, it is difficult to provide a precise legal definition. If the practice of marginalizing the so-called populist parties were to have legal support, Article 10.1 should have read, "The functioning of the European Union shall be founded on representative democracy with the exclusion of populist parties." However, one could respond that anti-populist practices deviate from the principles and are not the principles themselves. But I submit that marginalizing the opposition is inherent in the EU system. In Article 1 we read, and I quote, "This treaty marks a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe," end of quote. Integration is thus presented as a one-way process, and since the union is to be ever closer, it is obvious that legitimacy is implicitly denied to those who reject the project of never-ending integration and do not wish for further centralization of the union. And do the European nations truly want an ever closer union? Apparently not, because if they did, there would be no need for lying to them. The term Monnet method has entered the language to describe the formation of the integration process. Jean Monnet, one of the fathers of integration, became famous for saying that the peoples of Europe had no experience in the complexities of Europe's institutions, So it was justified for a small group of leaders to make consequential decisions without consulting the citizens. The idea was to prevent people from prevent people from noticing the changes made, and when the people finally discovered them, it would be too late, and they would have become accustomed to the changes anyway. The Monnet method, sometimes called integration by stealth, was widely accepted, though not acknowledged. But occasionally the truth spilled out. When following the rejection of the Constitutional Treaty in 2005, the Treaty of Lisbon was proposed, the former patron, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, admitted with astonishing candor, that's what he said, all previous proposals will be included in the new text, but will be somehow masked and concealed, unquote. Indeed, these are not merely declarations. From the outset, the assumption was made that integration would divide the peoples of Europe into two groups: enlightened, self-proclaimed, enlightened leaders, and the not so enlightened masses, on whose behalf decisions must be made to create an ever closer union. Thus, the actual system of the union was not a representative democracy, but a kind of enlightened oligarchy. And when we examine the treaties, we see that enlightened oligarchy is embedded in the text itself. Take the European Commission. Who are the commissioners? They are said to be proposed by the governments and once appointed to be independent of these governments. All in all, the Commission is supposed to be a body with strong political, even partisan roots, which at some point miraculously transforms into something like a group of impartial sages managing Europe. How this body, detached from any democratic foundation, can acquire such immense power over governments elected by universal suffrage is puzzling. It is as if a president of some country elected by parliament rather than by universal suffrage were given all the prerogatives to run the country. And this, we know, never happens. The presidents of Germany, Italy, or Hungary, elected by national assemblies, do not run their countries. And even to imagine they could would be preposterous. Naturally, the Commission is not a council of wise men, and its power to govern must come from somewhere. It certainly can derive from wisdom, even if the commissioners possessed it, which they don't. The Commission must rely on those who actually wield power within the Union and who conditionally grant a large portion to it. And those that wield power are the strongest member states and the strongest political parties. And having borrowed its powers from the big guys, the Commission can exercise it by subordinating the weaker players. But, one might respond, the Treaty of the European Union does explicitly provide checks for the Commission should it extend its power too far. Article 5 lists 3 principles that should constrain the Commission: the principles of conferral, proportionality, and subsidiarity. But this article is dead. I've never heard of the Commission being held accountable for violating, systemically violating, let me add, this article. And I think anyone who dared to sue the Commission could have no chance. A special protocol stipulates that while those who think the Commission violated the principle of subsidiarity may submit alternative proposals, but ultimately it is the Commission that decides everything. And what the protocol says is, I quote, "It may decide to maintain, amend, or withdraw the proposals," unquote. So much for the principle of Roman law that no one is a judge in their own case. The treaties explicitly granted the Commission this privilege. To make things worse, the treaties make the Commission, quote unquote, guardians of the treaties. One can thus logically conclude that the oligarchic character of the Commission is a guarantee that the EU will continue to be a representative democracy. Let us take another European institution, the European Court of Justice. The ECJ is too inherently political. It is the governments, the political bodies par excellence, that send their candidates to the court. But the actual admission is based on co-optation, conducted by a committee of several people appointed by the president of the court. As one might imagine, these 7 or 8 individuals ensure that those selected will follow the orthodoxy and political line, always siding with the ruling oligarchy and the ever closer union directive. Through its rulings, the ECJ has managed to put itself above the national constitutional tribunals and above the national constitutions, which left the citizens practically unprotected by national legal systems. Undermining what we have always believed to be non-underminable, that is the national constitutions, and being undermined by a body with such tenuous legitimacy is something unprecedented in a civilized world. And not only did this shocking step fail to generate a proper response, but it was hailed as a significant progress of the rule of law. The latest example is the ECJ's attempt to impose recognition of so-called same-sex marriages on countries whose constitutions do not recognize such unions. The perplexing thing is that this pursuit of arbitrary power by the ECJ did not begin now, but dates back to the early 1960s, long before Maastricht and the creation of the EU. What I find particularly disconcerting is that the docility with which the ECJ's assault was met. Why didn't the governments halt this process when it was in its early stages? Why didn't they just refuse to accept the rulings as having absolutely no justification in the European treaties? Even those governments that declared their strong sovereignist stance, such as the Gaullists in France or Margaret Thatcher in the UK, finally capitulated. If they had opposed the European Court's morbid ambitions, we would have been better off today. What was feasible then is much more difficult now. It is not that the big guys have no power to do it, but that doing it today would have ignited a revolution that the EU might not have survived. To generalize the above, why is so little said about all these lies? Whence this leaping to the docility? There are many reasons. I will mention only one. We are witnessing a rapid erosion of European or even Western identity. The traditional components of European identity, Christianity, Greece, and Rome, have lost their significance. Whether the Union would have looked different had the Europeans not squandered their legacy, we obviously do not know. However, the fact is that after spurning it, they have created an identity void which various prophets of political movements have been trying to fill. The last 100 years or more provide ample examples. The oligarchy in charge of the European integration has been taking advantage of the existence of this void and attempting to create a new European man, believing that the old European one no longer exists. They therefore think that they should provide the new Europeans with a new collective identity. And having buried Christianity, Greece and Rome, they probably believe that to give them a new soul, the kind of Jacques Delors once spoke of, is just a question of sufficiently strenuous indoctrination and social engineering. To conclude, contrary to the hopes cherished by Schuman, de Gasperi and others, the conception of integration culminating in the European Union belongs to a part of our tradition that has been animated by a revolutionary spirit and ideological hubris. Although this tradition has brought us little good and much harm, it is still alive in Europe. Even the spectacular failure of the communist experiment did not extinguish its flame. A good metaphor, already mentioned before by Monica, I think, for this tradition is Mary Shelley's story of Frankenstein, the young scientist who wanted to create a perfect being, but instead created a monster. The founder of European integration also wanted to produce a perfect political entity, and what they in fact produced looks more and more like its opposite. My argument, let me repeat, has been that the error lay in the conception, not in subsequent mishaps or miscalculation.
Thank you, because I think so many of the discussions around the European Union try and avoid grappling with the questions of origin. And well, I think there's a lot of political and intellectual cowardice that goes on when people try and grapple with what the European Union has become, and they pretend that if only we could just go back a few years, it was all kind of better then. And I guess my question to you is, well, why is that? And because on one level you can understand politically, people don't want to be seen as leading another kind of exit from the EU. They don't want to be advocating in their countries something that seems very radical, which is to completely do away with the European Union if it was a kind of conceived in a Frankenstein fashion to begin with. But I'm struck when I speak to people across Europe that even in private, even supposed patriotic candidates or parties or politicians in private will also say, oh, it'd be fine, we just need to go back a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. What do you think it is that accounts for this kind of lack of, as it were, courage to get to grips with the foundation of the Union?
As I said, we do not know much about what was going on at that time, and there were several arguments, and the language that the founding fathers used was rather obscure, so you can find anything that you want, that the nations will exist or the nations will cease to exist. And then that it will be a European state or there won't be a European state. Or the concept European, the European Union or the states, the United States of Europe was used by many people, and no clear meaning was attached to it. So those who are enthusiastic about integration believe that there was something great, right, morally good, and uplifting in the act of creating the idea of European integration. Also, we have to be aware that the Christian Democrats were not the only group that suggested the creation of integrated Europe. There were philosophers, writers. George Orwell wrote an essay on European integration. Ortega y Gasset also advocated European integration. There were rather, I would say, strange ideas. And last but not least, the communists, who became quite influential later on, as early as 1940s, right? They came up with this concept of a European state. And mind you, in almost every document you can read, there was inherently this idea, what later on was called Monnet method. That is, do not speak openly about the actual plans or how you want the integration to proceed. People should not know too much, because if people know too much, then the whole project will fizzle out.
You dwelled upon an alternative reality. What would have happened if Europe, since decades, would remain faithful to its legacy of Christianity, Rome, and Greece? But we are where we are. My question is as follows. Well, in fact, it is a question asking you to comment on the speech by President of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, in Charles University in Prague 10 days ago. What he said there was that first, EU project should go back to its roots and step back to observing those Article 5, which you quoted. I mean, the proper reducing competences which were taken over by Brussels. And that would be a scenario of action within the treaties, but scaling back all the wrong things which you rightly indicated.
Great.
But at the same time, he indicated eventuality of going back from Lisbon Treaty to Nice Treaty, if you read properly two of his 7 points. So question is, please do comment. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Why don't you address that quickly, and then we'll get or do you mind if I take 2, and then you can reflect a bit? Thank you so much. Yeah, at the back. Start speaking, and they'll bring the microphone up. Yeah.
So, thank you very much. My question is, do we have a credible alternative? We have an internal debate. Now we know that we don't want a federal state, at least many people, including me, I don't want a European federal state. But we have also an external reality. We are demographically small, we are economically smaller, we have no strategic weight as Europeans. So what kind of Europe can we develop that it is still a credible and strong actor to defend our interest in the world, while at the same time preserving our soul, our identity, our national traditions? So is there a way, a credible alternative to that European Union that we have developed in the meantime, with all its mistakes and so on, and that we probably all want to reform? Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. So we'll take the gentleman at the front, and then you'll come back. Yeah.
Good morning. You started saying that Europe has not a soul, something like that. I would like to say that yes, Europe has a soul. The soul of Europe was the core of the concepts and ideas which shaped the modern civilization. Concepts such as democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, scientific method, tolerance. Without a doubt, the soul of Europe was a massive producer of talents around the continent and meaningful disciplines, sciences, arts, literature, music, philosophy, and so on. There is not other place over the world where mankind has reached this magnificent peak of us seen here. Considering the current situation and the new rise in AI technology, which will even have a stronger impact in the cultural decline, how does Europe adapt its own real identity to this day and age, not only to survive and evolve, but to be a light, a hope for other nations as historical has been? Thank you.
Thanks. What I'm going to do, Ryszard, I'm going to take the last person who wants to speak, and then I'll give you 5 minutes to address all those questions. But I've noted them down as well, so I can prompt you if needs be. But yes, at the back.
So I would be interested in your opinion on the most recent scandal regarding the European External Action Service, the corruption there, and Mrs. Federica Mogherini's role at the College of Europe and her arrest. So if you could comment on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, you'll remember them, but if you want to prompt, I can go through them. But we'll begin maybe with the speech of Nawrocki.
Well, the easiest answer is to the last question. Well, the fish rots from the head down, so what else is there to add? My argument was that there is not much you can do within the treaties as they exist now. It's true that the treaties have been were extended or sidestepped or violated, but there is little in the treaties that can prevent the big guys from doing it. The Commission or the strongest political players. with the Commission as it is, with this voting system in the Council, with the Parliament, which is a completely useless institution, which should be dismantled as quickly as possible. And I said that when I was an MEP, not that I'm no longer an MEP, and so it's difficult to make any move for improvement, and nobody is interested in improvement. No European institutions, and I think the big guys are even less interested in doing it. They are more interested in expanding the power, and there is nothing in the treaties that can prevent them from pursuing such policies. So the idea of going back to some previous stages of integration, of course, were superior to what we have now. But I just don't imagine how you can go about it. As in politics, you have to create a coalition, common interest, and exert pressure, right? And then start negotiations which might lead to a compromise. The problem is that we don't have such an agent, such a coalition that can pursue the policies of reforming the EU, unless we have such a coalition, a group of states, organizations that can challenge the European Commission, that can veto the decisions in the Council. There is not much we can do. I was delighted to hear what President Nawrocki, President of Poland, said in Charles University in Prague. Not because I think it's feasible in the foreseeable future, but at least these things were said. And we have to be aware that words matter, especially that the European Union has managed to create a sort of verbal theater, self-congratulatory, right? Self-indulgent. Anything you said should be in favor of European Union. If you are not in favor of the European Union, you're a fascist, you're the enemy. So these things have to be said. The European Union is an oligarchy. The European Union has done a lot of damage. The European Union is based on lies. It's not just the politicians lie, but the system is based on lies, and so on and so on.
Very, very, very well said. If I could then draw your attention to one of the other questions, which I think bedevils all us who have our criticisms of the EU and even fundamental ones as you do, which is this question of what could come after or next, even if first step, as I agree, is to begin to speak the truth about what we're faced with. But we also have to have, at least at some level, a position, a kind of picture of what we want to get to. I'm not entirely convinced that we really do need to club together because the world is really so dangerous, etc., etc. But I'd be interested in your view. What do we counterpose to the current status of the European Union?
Favor of some kind of cooperation, institutionalized cooperation, but that is extremely difficult because of for many reasons. But one of the reasons is the inequality of political actors. Well, if you on the one hand you have France and you have Germany, and on the other hand you have Cyprus, with all due respect to Cyprus, you see that there is not much, that there is too much asymmetry between these two sides, and it's not the kind of asymmetry that can be annihilated by the treaties, right? So I think that what we can do is create, if we indulge in political fantasies, right? We should create some kind of regional alliances, stronger alliances. Therefore, I believe that V4, should it be revived, it has a future of becoming such a regional alliance that can act in a coordinated way and change crush the petrified system of power that exists that exists today. So I think we should rather go this way than I don't know, make some big plans for a new European organization.
Brilliant. Ryszard, it seems insane, ridiculous that we only allowed ourselves 30 minutes for this conversation. We could speak probably for the whole afternoon and get lots of your expertise, but you've been really enlightening even though we kept you to a short time. I'm sorry, but you were very enlightening. Can we give Ryszard a very warm thanks?